long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and the first-time reader and scissor-wielding little doctor over on my right, it's Mr. Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it going?
Ring around the rose. Yeah, my name is King Newbie Matt Freeman.
Yeah, we said that part already, Matt. You're too busy singing scary nursery rhymes.
Why are all nursery rhymes about death, Scott?
I don't know, because it's the one universality of existence.
I guess.
And we need to teach that to our children via wonderful songs.
Yeah, sure.
This week on the show, we are concluding part 1 of Insomnia by discussing chapters 8, 9, and 10. Ralph gets his first glimpse of the part's titular little bald doctors and decides to come clean to Bill about what's been happening to him. It doesn't go well, Matt.
Doesn't go great.
What'd you think of this week's reading?
It was stressful. It's starting to get real stressful. We're having really terribly sad dreams. It's getting bad enough that he realizes he has to reach out to somebody for help, and then when he does, it doesn't really work out for him.
No.
I'm just incredibly invested in this character. Just more so every week. So
yeah, I think we'll maybe get into this in a little detail as we go, but I'm curious, like, at this point in the story, where do you think it's going?
Well, okay. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that could be going on. Like, it could be that the little doctors, which I think are just, Cantoi or low men. Although it is interesting that they don't have hair, because the low men usually have a wig, at least, don't they? Anyway.
Yeah, and I don't think anything about their size matches up to the low men.
That's true.
They're small. They're like less than 4 feet tall. But
they're clearly a non-human wearing some kind of mask. Clearly, he says. Okay. Fishing for some kind of sound from Scott.
I'm not going to give you a damn thing.
Now so the main question in my mind is, how much does the little bald doctor plotline intersect with the Susan Day plotline? Like, are we building toward a big conflagration where Susan Day is in town, she's giving her speech, and Ralph is having to run around chasing aura footprints to try to defuse a bomb that's been set up by the little bald doctors, or by, Ed under the command of the little bald doctors, or whatever. I don't know how much of a thriller this is going to turn into, because it doesn't here's the thing, it doesn't feel anything like it's going to turn into a thriller right now, but it could very well do that. And I'm sure, and King is deft enough with tone that he could do that and it would work.
I think it's interesting. Like, this week's section in particular, it's just not a lot of plot happens. I mean, it's not that important events don't happen in these 3 chapters, but plot wise, what moves forward? Not a lot. It's mostly just conversations and character interactions. And that's very classic Stephen King, but I guess we could comfortably say a third of the way through the book at this point. And we still have, the events of the story looming on the horizon. And it's mostly just Ralph dealing with internal stuff.
Yeah. I think the main advancement here is that it's gotten so bad that Ralph can no longer even pretend that he's not seeing things that he believes are real.
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, either I'm crazy or this is real, but it's far enough down the path that of one of those that I need to reach out to someone.
Yeah. And unfortunately for him, that does not go well at all.
Yeah.
So we'll see who's left at this point. I mean, That's kind of the most depressing thing about this week's reading, is he goes to Bill McGovern because he kind of logics it out and realizes that Bill McGovern's the only one he has.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't go well.
And we wanted him to also,
yeah,
up to this point, we've been like, come on, Ralph, you got to tell somebody. You got to start building your quartet, right?
Yeah.
And he tries, and it doesn't work.
That's the really interesting thing about all this, is there's this, we're going to talk about this, I think, when we get to it. So maybe I'll just kind of preface the conversation here and we can return to it. But this idea that the things we've wanted Ralph to do seem regularly like the book is saying are the wrong things. And it's really interesting that the things that are happening to Ralph, we don't know 100%, but it seems like, from the perspective of a person reading a book written by Stephen King that takes place in a world tangential to the Dark Tower, it seems like all these things are real, right? And yet he finally, shares this information with someone else and is rejected for it. And then we know that Bill is wrong about this stuff, that he's not imagining it. So I don't know. It's really interesting what he's doing with the characters and how he's playing with these interactions between them, for sure.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that in some more detail when we actually get to those sections of the chapters. For now, let's move into our announcements. Only one quick announcement for you folks this week. The voting in our Do the King Thing short fiction contest closes this Saturday, September 11th. If you are a patron currently and have not read your 4 assigned stories and voted on one of them, please do that before Saturday. If you are not a patron but are like, wait, we can read the fiction and vote on it? Yeah, you can. Go to patreon.com/doofmedia. You can pledge at any of the levels, and you will have access to all 39 stories. You will be assigned 4 of them based on your birth date, and you will read those 4 and vote for your favorite. Once all those votes are in, we will kind of tabulate the results and then pick a certain number. We haven't, landed on a definitive number on that yet, because we wanted to see how that final vote shakes out. But there will be one final round of some of the top entries against each other, and then we will crown a winner of this contest.
Yeah. I mean, we really would appreciate it if you would go vote, though. There are a lot of votes so far, but I would like it if there were more. Just kind of amplify that signal. Let the true great stories rise to the top. No, I agree. And these stories are so great, folks. If you haven't read them, like I haven't made my way through every single one, but I've been kind of slowly in the moments of free time I get, been reading them one by one, and they're so fun. It's such a joy to read these. So you're missing out if you haven't done it yet. Yeah, they're each such a nice bite-sized length that that to me makes it so pleasant, because you're just like, I'm just going to sit down and read one of them, do something else, sit down, read another, and do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Remember, Saturday, September 11th, a date that should not be too hard for you to forget. That is when voting closes. I think it's about midday when that closes. Let me make sure before I say that. It doesn't say. I hate Patreon sometimes. Please support us on it, but it'll be actually 5:00 in the evening on Central Time. So that's when it closes. So please get in your votes, read your stories and vote. Please. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
All right, Matt, let's get into it and begin with our first chapter of the week. It's chapter 8, and this chapter begins with a dream sequence. We haven't been focusing much on Ralph's dreams on our show thus far. They've been there. They've kind of been in the background. And if you think back, I think King has been laying the groundwork for the importance of these dreams in at least the last 100 pages or so. But now they kind of come to the forefront of our story, and they take center stage. And so we're going to have to talk about them a little bit, at least this dream specifically.
Yeah, this is a fun new wrinkle. I got to say, I wasn't really expecting this to happen. And as yet, not fully sure what to make of it, but I think we might tease it apart as we go. Yeah,
definitely. I am very much enjoying the idea of dream sequences being very important in a story called Insomnia. It's just, I don't think King could help himself with that.
Right. And we've had characters emphasize like, well, the important thing is you're still dreaming. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he is indeed. In this particular dream, Ralph wakes up on a beach and he finds a head sticking out of the top of the sand. We learn very quickly that it's Carolyn's head, and something is terribly, terribly wrong with her aura. I kind of like the detail that we don't actually realize that in this dream, Ralph is seeing auras until he just casually mentions that Caroline's aura is off. It kind of shows how used to this thing he's getting, or maybe it's just the dream logic of that you don't even really notice. Oh, in the dreams I can also see auras. That's wild.
Yeah, it's funny because this is actually putting credence on my theory that I will talk about later, that Ralph has always been able to see auras but suppressed it, and maybe subconsciously in his dreams he can always see them and just doesn't notice because dream logic, like you said. Interesting.
Yeah. So Ralph rushes to dig Carol up and then notices that the dog Rosalie is here too. And what is she holding in her mouth, Matt? But Bill McGovern's missing Panama hat, a hat that we will actually see later on in this week's reading. Matt, what is the significance of this to you? You know, so we have his dead wife lying buried in the sand, except for her head. The tide is coming in, so he has to rush to save her. And then there's a dog with the hat. What is the meaning of this in your mind?
Well, the meaning is the dog has the hat. No, I mean, I don't know. Like, the dog's probably either like an agent of the white, and we're like in one of those stories where the dog is not even really a dog, but rather some kind of angelic being, or maybe the dog is just like a symbol standing in for something. I don't know. It's interesting because the dog seems to be like active in the story. Like I'm not fully joking that the dog actually seems to be, you know, following the little doctors. So I don't know. Maybe it's a magic dog. The fact that it has Bill McGovern's hat, like, why would it have Bill McGovern's hat? Why?
It's not like in reality it has Bill McGovern's hat, because that's Doctor Number 3 has Bill McGovern's hat. So it's interesting. I think you're right that King has been playing up the elevated importance of this animal, you know, since it was introduced in the story. Like, I think Ralph kind of casually brings up is like, oh, there's the local homeless dog that kind of wanders the street, especially on trash day. But this dog has kept recurring again and again and again. And the dog has also been in every single one of Ralph's dreams since this insomnia. So whatever part she has to play, either literally or symbolically in the story, it seems like it's an important one.
It is interesting that just the fact that the, you know, street dog has a name that they have given the dog.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder who named it Rosalie, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's this week that Ralph kind of declares Rosalie basically a member of the neighborhood, right? Like, she's just like the rest of the old dying folks that live along the street, right?
Right.
That she belongs just as much there. I think, you know, subtextually, Ralph identifies with Rosalie a lot. I mean, she's old, hurt, and alone.
Yeah.
And so I think he sees a lot of himself in her, although this is something that Ralph will never admit to himself, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So then in this section, Matt, King kind of just reminds us, I don't know, we haven't read a lot of King horror books, but he reminds us here that he is indeed a horror writer. And as Carolyn tells him to keep an eye out for something she calls the white man tracks, her head explodes. When we get this section here, you'll find out soon enough, Carolyn replied. And then the swelling on her head popped with a sound like a hammer striking a slab of meat. A haze of blood flew into the clear, salt-smelling air, and a horde of black bugs the size of cockroaches were pouring out of her. Ralph had never seen anything like them before, not even in a dream, and they filled him with an almost hysterical loathing. He would have fled, Carolyn or not, but he was frozen in place, too stunned to move a single finger, let alone to get up and run. Some of the black bugs ran back into Carolyn by the way of her screaming mouth, but most of them hurried down her cheek and shoulder to the wet sand. Their accusing alien eyes never left Ralph as they went. And this is your fault, the eyes seemed to say. You could have saved her, Ralph, and a better man would have saved her. All right, Matt, what are these bugs?
Well, they're little doctors. I told you.
I see. They're little doctors.
It's little doctors. It's the little bugs, the vampire bugs. Look, I know that I'm kind of sounding crazy, but we are trying to interpret a dream here. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to consider whether we should take this literally or just a sign that Ralph is beating himself up unfairly. The idea that, you know, you could have saved her. Like, you know, maybe his wife's brain cancer was indeed not just a random piece of bad luck, but rather something that he could have done something about. You know, like, maybe if he really does have the ability to see people's health, and but he had been suppressing it, maybe if he had just turned that gaze on his sick wife, he would have noticed that she was much sicker than she seemed, and, you know, detected her ill health early. And then in that sense, maybe he is responsible. I know I'm really kind of reaching here. But I mean, at the very least, it's a sign that he subliminally holds himself responsible for her death, which is not something that I think we have seen an indication of prior to this.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's interesting when we get with these dream sequences, we can either especially in a book like this where there are almost textually otherworldly powers at work. Like we've had like this recurring symbol of Ralph being forced down a long, scary tunnel. That's kind of been a beat that King has hit pretty often and will do again here in these chapters. So like whenever you have a dream sequence, it can be either I am using the dream sequence to reflect the internal meaning and the internal struggle and these things within the character that he is not willing to admit to himself. Or I could just be communicating with my character. This is how this otherworldly force like talks to the character. And there's not really a clear indication, at least in this sequence, which of those two things it is. I do think it's fun to consider it from both angles, though, because I think the simplest explanation is, yes, that Ralph blames himself for his wife's death. He thinks he should have seen it sooner, either, just noticed changes in her behavior or done something about her headache sooner, or maybe he had this power before and ignored it or was running away from it or whatever you want to say, but we're just really not sure. But I do like the idea that there is some otherworldly communication going on here as well. Just to what end, we just don't know.
Yeah, I just feel like when it is supposed to be otherworldly communication, it's usually a little bit more literal and obvious. Sure. Like the dog would like drop the hat and say
talk.
Dandelo or something, and you'd be like, okay, we're doing a thing. But no, nothing like that, at least that I detected, happened. So.
Yeah, but I mean, there is at least one moment of communication here where Carolyn tells him to look out for the white man tracks, right? And so, like, is this something coming from his head? Because I think we'll see in this chapter that Ralph decides that means the footprint auras left by the little bald doctors. Although, why exactly isn't clear, right? Because like this is a very specific term, right? White man tracks, right? Yes, the little bald doctors are technically white skinned, right? Technically,
right.
But that's such an interesting way of describing them. It's not like the tracks are white. The tracks are the colors of their aura, which are this greenish color. So it introduces some uncertainty there, I think.
Yeah, that was the thing that jumped out to me as like a potential thing that he's misinterpreting. Although what else white man tracks could mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll find out. I don't know. But as you said, he wakes from the dream. He doesn't remember much of anything, but he does remember the white man tracks, that warning from Carolyn. So yeah, I mean, it's fun to imagine. I don't know that this is a depiction of his subconscious, but also, was that Carolyn communicating to him? Like, was that a version of Carolyn that was sent to communicate to him from beyond the grave, to warn him about something, to give him his mission? We just don't know.
Yeah, we'll just have to see if this kind of thing keeps happening. If there are several more dreams where he gets, useful information, then I'll start to think that something's trying to talk to him.
Sure. So Ralph goes to kind of assume the position in his chair that looks out on the empty street, which is kind of where he spends the rest of his night waiting for the sun to rise. And in this moment, this is when he finally sees them, Matt. The little bald doctors, they're real, as you predicted. they're real, and they're here. We see two short bald men hanging out on the stoop of May Locker's house, the woman that we know is dying of emphysema. And I want to read this description here, and then I want to talk about these two characters, Matt, because I think this description is interesting. He sensed nothing frightening about the two figures on May Locker's stoop, other than the long, sharp-looking thing one of them was holding. Ralph suspected that not even your dreaming mind could do much with a couple of short, bald guys wearing white tunics, which looked left over from central casting. Also, there was nothing frightening about their behavior, nothing furtive, nothing menacing. They stood on the stoop as if they had every right to be there in the darkest, stillest hour of the morning. They were facing each other, the attitudes of their bodies and large bald heads suggesting two friends having a sober, civilized conversation. So, I mean, you kind of predicted that these things were going to show up in the story. Did you predict this look of them? Like, not only are they not menacing or frightening, but they just, I think he describes them as blue collar. These seem like blue collar workers just on a shift doing something.
No. In fact, I mean, when I thought little bald doctor, I was kind of imagining they'd be like littler than this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, either like actually they're the little bugs, which is what I thought at first, or like, well, maybe they're like little tiny little guys. But no, I mean, 4 feet tall. I guess that's, kind of little, but that's. I don't know. I didn't expect them to be like obviously wearing skin suits. Like, okay, so here's the thing: is I just pretty much as soon as these were described, I was like, okay, they're probably Cantoy, but they're not wearing wigs for some reason. And they put off this, like, I was gonna say aura, which is confusing now because not a literal aura, but they put off like a vibe of just being like creepy and inhuman and evil, despite the fact that they also simultaneously put off a vibe of being two buddies on their way to get a pint after work. So I don't know, like it's such a great hook of a mystery at this point. I'm just like, I might know vaguely what direction we're going with this, but I don't really. And it's funny because the Dark Tower reading has just like not given me the key to understand this. Like, you would think that I would just see it and be like, oh, it's obviously the Cantoy. I mean, it's possible that King like was gonna have the Cantoy look like this and then he changed his mind or something. But
yeah, I mean, I will say there is no description of the Cantoy in anything we've seen that would make them look casual and non-frightening. Like, that's the weirdest thing about these two guys is there's nothing like, yes, their faces seem, I think the book describes them as like mass produced, like it's like a printed face, that kind of thing. Like, there's no discerning features. It's kind of just this very blank slate type of facial expression these guys have. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you said that they kind of come off as evil, and I actually, like, at least these two don't.
You're right. Yeah, it's the one later that I'm thinking of, though.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I mean, we'll get to him. But this first introduction, the only real menacing thing about them, as this says, is the scissors that we see one of them is holding.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's a sharp object in the hands of small bald men that are creeping about at night. And even creeping about is the wrong word, because they're not creeping about. Like, obviously these guys are used to not being seen. We can maybe make the assumption that most people can't see them. Right. And so there's no need to creep about because people can't see you. And one thing we don't know is how they would have reacted had they noticed Ralph could see them. Because we know how one of them reacts later, but these guys don't notice him.
Yeah, I mean, the one later presumably knows that Ralph called the cops because he saw something, which means they kind of infer, okay, Ralph can see us. And I think I also, when Ed was talking about seeing little bald doctors, it was kind of implied that was part and parcel with seeing the colors.
Yeah.
So.
But so what he does, I think there's something interesting going on here that before we move on, I wanted to talk about as well. Ralph, as soon as he sees these guys, he basically goes into this battle, this internal battle in his inner monologue. And I think it's really interesting because the way the battle is framed is his conscious or his internal monologue is trying to convince him that this is fake, where his external self is like, no, this thing's totally real. And normally it's kind of the opposite, right? Where like the rational, front part of your brain, like the active part of you is like, well, this can't be real. This is ridiculous. Like, there's little men with same faces creeping about it, and this can't be real. And then it's your kind of something deeper inside of you. It's like, well, I don't know. But it's kind of the opposite here, where he's the internal part of him is trying to convince him that it's a dream. No, it's a dream, Ralph. It's a dream. Yeah. It's a dream. You don't want to believe this.
It's too scary to believe that it's real. Whereas his rational mind is like, no, it is. It's funny. This reminds me of, something we said was our favorite part of Salem's Lot as well, where it's, people, a large amount of that book was dedicated to people grappling with the idea of like, no, it can't be vampires. That's crazy. And we had, I think, one of the most fun discussion question, answer read-throughs we ever did was like people's answers to like what they would do if their friend told them there was a vampire or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is, right? Because he's kind of been going through it in slow motion, but here I think it's come to a head where he's having that moment of like, I'm face to face with the supernatural. This is just really going to mess up my whole day, but I think I need to take action here.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a really great connection. I mean, that we're once again 2 season 2 books in, and both those books have centered around our characters struggling with accepting the things that were happening to them. And I feel like, I don't know, this just seems like something I think it would be a bad call to yada yada over, because like, especially in a novel format, we talked about this back in Salem's Lot, but like, we need to see the character processing the thing. Like we need to see them processing the crazy thing that's happening to them in a way that feels like I just don't think like any human being probably would not go, oh yeah, obviously these are real. Obviously I have powers now, and I have the Shining now because I'm in a book and I know this. So you need that time, and just like in Salem's Lot, Ralph is getting that time to kind of process it. I think, by the end of this section, he's pretty well in I believe all this is happening to me territory, and I don't think I'm crazy territory.
Right.
I really like this part. The next thing he does is he kind of rushes to his closet. He wants to get some binoculars to get a better look at the thing that the men are holding, but also a better look at their faces. And we get this really wonderful scene as he's digging through the bits and bobs of the closet. The shelf was a clutter of lost or forgotten items, most of which had belonged to Carolyn. These were small things, little more than scraps, but looking at them drove away the last lingering conviction that this had been a dream. There was an ancient bag of M&Ms, her secret snack food, her comfort food. There was a lace heart, a single discarded white satin pump with a broken heel, a photo album. These things hurt a lot more than the knife prick under his arm, but he had no time to hurt just now. And I love this because, again, Ralph never says, he never thinks or says the phrase, I'm still grieving my wife. I haven't even begun to postulate a life that exists without her. He doesn't say these things, but just like this closet makes that crystal clear.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, he's surrounded by her stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which is, only bad insofar as it all still causes him raw pain. He's not at all over it. Or, I mean, I don't think he will be. I don't think the goal is to be over it, but he's not even really coping well. Like, I think what you just said is pretty key, where it's like, we don't know, so earlier we pointed out, like, we don't really know what Ralph's life was like before. Mm-hmm. And we don't really know what Ralph's like plans are. He's just like retired, and he goes around to the store to buy his chicken soup, and sometimes he hangs out with his friends, and nothing like he's got no prospects. He walks and he gardens, and I don't know. His interactions are mostly centered around Bill and Lois, right? And I don't know, like, obviously there's some latent attraction stuff going on there with Lois. I think part of the reason why he's avoiding her is he's not ready to process those feelings quite yet. And then Bill, like, the more we learn about their friendship, the more fascinated I am at picking it apart, because I think it's in this section we learned that, like, he was a pallbearer at her funeral, which is like a big deal. Yeah, that's a like indication of very close to either Ralph or Carolyn. And yet he doesn't seem to know him very well at all. And, and like, he doesn't, I don't know. It's fascinating to me. Yeah. Well, he seems like a closed off and distant person who may have only really shared himself with his wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we move on, I like your point about, him avoiding Lois. Like, I thought when he was like, I have to tell someone, I was like, well, he's probably not going to tell McGovern, because he doesn't really trust McGovern. He thinks McGovern is kind of flighty and unserious, but Lois is great, and he thinks she's great, so he's going to go talk to Lois. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even occur to him to talk to Lois. Actually, he just he goes to McGovern, and I think something along the lines of what you said, where he's sort of subliminally even avoiding thinking about her as an option because of the confusing feelings that would bring up.
Yeah. Like, I think we've only seen them actually interact one-on-one, like one time in the book so far. And every other time it's been with the buffer of Bill. And I think he is much more comfortable with that buffer than otherwise.
Yeah, you're right.
So I really like this moment, though, where he realizes that he just referred to these short men as the little bald doctors, right? I think we make the assumption right away, but I think the book needed to take the time to have Ralph make it. It also reminds him that the phrase came from Ed, and thus in his mind, he's linking what is happening to him now to what is responsible for whatever Ed became.
Yeah. It's interesting because he describes them as wearing a tunic, which is not a doctor's coat, really.
No,
like, I think kind of looks like a doctor's coat, but is not a doctor's coat. So it's just interesting to think that, like, I guess I was kind of imagining them actually being doctors, right? But it's like, no, they're little bald guys with fake faces who are wearing some kind of white tunic. So what the hell does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah. It's, you almost wonder, obviously the phrase little bald doctor would not have occurred in his head had he not heard it. Right. So, like, there's it's ideas being put into his head from other people.
Right. Yeah.
There is a picture in one of the versions of the book of what they look like, but I can send that to you later.
Okay. Please do.
Yeah. I really like this description as well. Like, to go back to the I think the most fascinating thing to me about these doctors is the blue collar comparison, right? So we get this part right here where the bald doctors had now had the shared demeanor of men who had nearly reached an agreement. In that instant, they did not look like doctors at all to Ralph, in spite of their smocks. They looked like blue-collared workers coming off shift at some plant or factory. These two guys, clearly buddies, have stopped outside the main gate for a moment or two to finish off some subject that can't wait even long enough for them to walk down the block to the nearest bar, knowing it'll only take a minute or so in any case. Total agreement is only a conversational exchange or two away. I just love this idea. I love this idea that, like, he's looking at, to most people, invisible, short mystery men, and they're made so, it's so casual. It's so mundane almost in a lot of ways. Yeah.
No, it's so great. I mean, I can't wait to figure out what the hell is going on with these guys. Like, are they? I mean, is he right? Like, are they just literally buddies, and they just got done with their work that they, that their equivalent of the paper mill or whatever.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We'll find out. Here's the section where we describe their face, and maybe we've already kind of talked about this, but maybe we can focus on it a little bit here. Instead of dispelling it, his brief look through the binoculars intensified it. The little bald doctors did not actually seem to have features. They had faces, yes, eyes, nose, mouth, but they seemed as interchangeable as the chrome trim on the same make and model of a car. They could have been identical twins, but that wasn't the impression Ralph got either. To him, they looked more like department store mannequins, with their Arnell wigs whisked off for the night, their eerie resemblance not the result of genetics, but of mass production. So I can understand why you gleaned from that they're wearing masks. They just printed a bunch of masks and threw them on these guys.
But they could just be that these are like a creature that has been created just by some process or magic or so forth, where they're just kind of they're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
where the facial features that distinguish us are irrelevant to these people. They don't need them.
Yeah, right, because people can't see them anyway. So.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I think the most interesting aspect of them is that while they do have these bright green auras that Ralph sees, neither of them has the floaty balloon string above their head. So we've come to understand that as like a lifeline type thing, is like this is in healthy people it looks long and solid, in not so healthy people or older people it looks shorter and weaker. We saw actually in his dream Carolyn had one, but it looked terrible, which makes sense. But these guys don't have them at all. Yeah. So not human, at least.
Not human. I mean, I don't remember. Does the dog have a line?
I don't think he's described described it.
I don't think he does either. It'll be interesting to see that, because if the dog does and these guys don't, then they're like, not only are they not human, they're not even like alive, which would be kind of fun. So I did think that the scissors are probably like for clipping balloon strings, basically.
Okay. So I guess kind of expound on that. What is your theory for what these two dudes were doing here that night?
Well, they probably were, killing her, but why is something that I don't know. Like, are they harvesting the remainder of her life for some evil purpose? Do they just are they? I mean, one thing that occurred to me is like, maybe they're just death. Maybe they're the manifestation of, the Grim Reaper in this world, and they're just, everybody who dies, they show up and they clip your balloon string. I don't think that's true, because I just get the feeling there's something much more sinister and unusual going on here, and it has to do with the colors, and it has to do with everything that's sort of building in the background of the story. But like, you tell me there's a balloon string, and then you have scissors, and then you have the woman die. I'm like, okay, I'm sure there's some other way to put these puzzle pieces together, but I'm just gonna take the obvious one.
Sure. Yeah, we will find out one way or another in the future. But okay. I think that's I understand your reasoning behind that, and I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Cool.
So Ralph decides to call 911, worried about the state of poor Maylock. Is it Lochner or Locker? I think it's Locker. I think I add an N when I type it. And I just wanted to note this part right here, because I found this really fascinating. Sir, would you please give me your name and don't interrupt me, please, Officer Hagen, said the man who could no longer remember the last 4 digits of the Derry Cinema Center. Like, what a choice to use that descriptor in that moment, right? Yeah.
In this moment where he is apparently coming across as sounding so young and authoritative that people don't even recognize his voice. He's also the guy who is so out of it that he can't even remember the Cinephone or whatever. So I mean, it's such a Kingism, though, to just like jam characterization into every sentence like this.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, in that moment, is that the narrator reminding us of this, or is that so close third person that this is kind of Ralph commenting on the absurdity of this, that he's like taking command of this situation as he calls the police, but is barely hanging on himself.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's just fun to think about.
Yeah, I enjoy that idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So while he is waiting for the cops to show up, Rosalie the dog makes another appearance in this chapter, and we see that she is able to sniff the aura tracks left by the little bald doctors and starts to following them. This also serves to kind of help convince Ralph once and for all that, hey, this stuff's real. We had little Natalie saw these things before. Now Rosalie the dog is seeing them. The evidence is piling up, and I have to accept that these are real. And as we said earlier, he kind of concludes that these are the white man tracks Carolyn told him to look out for. But again, why he's so confident on that? I mean, he could be right. I'm not saying he's not right, but it's a interesting turn of phrase for him to be so confident that this must be what this means.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, there are a few leaps, right? Like, for example, I don't think this is true, right? But I'm just pointing out that if you were hallucinating that much, you could also hallucinate a dog walking down the street and sniffing the spot where you saw the footprint.
Sure.
So like, that's not proof. Like, the unfortunate thing is, once you are down a certain amount of hallucinating, the concept of proof becomes meaningless, because you can just hallucinate proof, and that's not proof. You're just lost now. So I don't think he's there. I don't think that's what's happening. But like, I don't necessarily think that his logic is sound throughout this bit here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a battle going on inside of him, and I think the truth is Ralph he doesn't want to believe he's crazy. He wants to believe this stuff is really happening. So any evidence that seems to indicate that, he embraces fully.
Sure, and I think it is really happening. And also, you could make the argument that, like, no, I've been hallucinating extremely bright, colorful auras, but I haven't seen anything that suggests that I'm hallucinating mundane things like dogs.
Yeah.
So for the time being, it's provisionally, I can take that as a kind
Sure.
of confirmation. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I kind of, you speaking of the Salem's Lot discussion question we had really makes me wonder, like, what would it take? Like, if this was happening to me, what would it take for me to finally convince myself that this was really happening, that I wasn't going crazy, you know?
Right.
And I don't actually know the answer to that question, because I don't think this is something I'm ever going to have to actually deal with. But I would think it would take quite a bit for me to convince myself that this is real and not. I think I would go immediately to, oh yeah, something. My brain broke,
Yeah,
and something's wrong here.
and this is even harder to test because it seems by definition to be like incorporeal.
Yeah,
It's like, how do you test the idea that you're, okay, I'm seeing green fuzz coming off of flowers that I just cut. Like that isn't, that's not anything that I can do an experiment on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most you could do experimentally is like walk up to a random person, glean some information from them based on their aura, and then like have McGovern ask about them and see if their information's correct,
Yeah.
But that's a flawed experiment, but
yeah. No, that's a good point. That, I mean, there's nothing you can do, but it relies on that sort of thing, right? And then and then it's open to interpretation of like what they say and stuff.
Yeah. All right, so the police come eventually, and they, after some difficulty, they are able to kick down the door, and they bring poor Maylocker out, and she is, as everyone feared, she's dead. And so the chapter ends on this, and I think this is just some beautiful and awful writing at the same time. Ralph raised the heels of his palms to his eyes. Some inarticulate sound of grief and rage, horror and wariness escaped him. He sat that way for a long time, wishing he had never seen any of this and hoping blindly that if there really was a tunnel, he would not be required to enter it after all. The auras were strange and beautiful, but there was not enough beauty in all of them to make up for one moment of that terrible dream in which he had discovered his wife buried below the high tide line. Not enough beauty to make up for the dreary horror of his lost wakeful nights, or the sight of that sheeted figure being rolled out of the house across the street. So Ralph's not doing well, Matt. This has been true, since page 1 of this book, but it's really escalating here.
Yeah. This is the most been out of shape we've seen him.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on from this chapter, I thought the whole sequence where the cops arrive and then they like sort of do a Three Stooges routine trying to get into the house, and like at one point they grab the jaws of life out of their car, and then one of them is like, what are you going to do with that? And then eventually they kick the door down, don't they?
Yeah,
right. Yeah. And so it's just like it was an interesting beat there because we seem to be getting a lot of information about the cops, what the cops are doing, how the cops feel about things, and seeing them like basically fail to deal with a locked door does not give us a lot of faith about their ability to deal with future serious problems that might arise.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I didn't pull any of that stuff out, but it is a lot of fun kind of characterization that we see everything through the angle of Ralph and his assumptions of what's going on there. I did like the beat where we learn that the door is locked from the inside, right? Like
right.
All doors are locked from the inside, and that's part of the mystery of what happened here. If you're saying something malicious happened here, but how was that possible? And so yeah, they're the jaws of life to try to open the door. You do wonder. Derry, at least in this context, it's not like a Salem's Lot small town. Derry is a bigger town. It is more, it's not quite like a city, but it's closer to a city than it is a small town. And so you would think that in a city like this, the cops would be better trained. But I think to your point, this is kind of demonstrating that they're not used to having to help with things like this.
Uh-huh.
And as we move into the next chapter, in which Ralph is talking with Leidecker and kind of understanding the police point of view on everything that's happening with Susan Day and the pro-choice, pro-life debate that is going to come to a head in the town when she comes and speaks. Yeah, it does not give us comfort over their ability to handle this on their own, for sure.
Yeah. I'm I don't know where we're going with that exactly, but yeah, basically the cops are not inspiring confidence.
No. I mean, but I just like, I know what the Jaws of Life look like. I know what they do. And I just like, were you just going to like rip the side of her house out?
Right.
Like, okay.
Well, the funny thing is, I don't actually know like what would be the procedure here. Like, okay, you get called to come to somebody's house. You're told that there are people skulking around outside. You bang on the door. Nobody answers. What does a cop do? Like, what is the standard procedure? I don't know.
Yeah. When do they have actually the authority to knock the door down?
Right. Because I mean, yeah, you knocked the door down and it was nothing. Then now you've knocked down the door of some poor person.
Yeah.
Which you don't want to do if you can avoid it. So I don't know. It's just, it seems like that would be the kind of thing where they would have a standard procedure where it's like either you knock the door down or you don't. But there's not all this hemming and hawing about it.
Yeah, I think you're right that they're just really thrown for a loop here and nobody knows what to do. And it's not until the detective like kind of just takes control and says, we're just going to knock this fucking door down. Like, right. we don't got time for this.
Right.
Yeah. I think there would definitely be like a standard thing. I think when someone has called in worried about the state of someone and you don't get an answer, I think they have all authority to enter the premises if they think someone is in imminent danger. So I think they would be able to do that. But yeah, that they didn't know for sure is certainly telling.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move into chapter 9 and talk more about the police, Matt, because this chapter begins with Ralph visiting our old gunslinger friend, Detective Leidecker. He's here at the police office to give a statement about the stabbing that occurred to him just yesterday, but also he's kind of secretly here to ask about what the heck happened to May Locker. Before he does that, though, we learn that Leidecker has been put in charge of the task force meant to protect Susan Day while she's in town, and he has a lot to say about her, Matt. A lot. He makes it very clear that while he is Catholic, he is also pro-choice, but he hates Susan Day, not just dislikes, he hates her. He says, she's stirring the motherfucking pot, Leidecker cried. She comes into my town and I have to protect her. Fine, I've got good men, and with just a pinch of luck, I think we can probably see her out of town with her head still on and her tits pointing the right way. But what about what happens before? And what happens after? Do you think she cares about any of that? Do you think the people who run women care give much a shit about the side effects as far as that goes? So this is an interesting wrinkle in this whole debate, right? Because obviously the kind of the center of this whole book has been this debate around abortion. And what Leidecker reminds us of here in this moment is that this debate actually started as just a zoning issue, that like some members of the city council that were anti-abortion were trying to get things rezoned to where woman care would have to close down. But we learn here that like that was actually a pipe dream, and like to do that would have been basically impossible because it's also a hospital, and like the effort it would take to rezone a hospital it would never have happened. So there was actually no threat here, right?
Yeah, it was just one of those standard like political chess games where somebody just tries to do something for the sake of activism, probably not even thinking it was going to work.
Yeah,
just sort of trying to score a few points for their side. Yeah,
maybe election was coming up and they just wanted to be able to say, look, I tried to rezone things so women care, and you could say that in a speech. I mean, like what we have right here is like, it's not about woman care, and that's what drives me absolutely bug fuck. It's about abortion. Shit, no. Abortion rights are safe in Maine and enduring no matter what Susan Day says at the Civic Center Friday night. This is about whose team is the best team, about whose side God's on. It's about who's right. And that's a really interesting lens on this whole thing. I think, speaking personally, we are living in a time right now, and I live in the state of Texas right now that just passed a law just last week, effectively banning abortions after 6 weeks in the state. And the Supreme Court basically ruled that they're going to let them do it for the time being until all these cases play out, which they will eventually get to the Supreme Court, I'm guessing, because I think this, at least according to precedent, this law is clearly unconstitutional, but that's a whole thing. But I think like there's something to me, and I don't want, quaint is the wrong word because obviously it's a different time now than the 90s, but there's something to me like really 90s about this whole argument, right? Like, and to be clear, I'm not saying that Stephen King agrees with Leidecker, that like he's using Leidecker as his mouthpiece for his opinions on the issue. We've already talked about how dangerous that is to do. I'm not saying he's doing that here, but it is interesting that like to distill this down to there's no actual risk of this law changing. This is just about which side determining is the right side. I like it. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're being shown a variety of understandable positions from a variety of people who are just trying to get through their day and, you know, do their part, keep society functioning in their own little way.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes perfect sense to me that a cop would be almost categorically against anything that's going to generate social unrest.
Yeah.
You know, because they're the ones that are going to have to deal with that, and like the cracked skulls at the riot or whatever are going to be their reality. They don't really care about this abstract political frou-frou, which is how I'm how they would see it. And you know, I mean, that's the thing, is like society sometimes has to pass a gallstone, and you know, there has to be conflict.
Yeah.
It's inevitable in any society. It's you have to get through it, right? And some cops are going to have to work overtime. It's just the way it is. But like from the perspective of the cop, you can imagine, you can commiserate with them being like, this is pointless. This is stupid.
Sure. Especially a kind of a town cop like this, where I love when he like talks about like, look, all these people are our people, the crazy ones, the normal ones, like the pro-lifers and the pro-choices, like these are dairy people, and I'm fine protecting dairy people. But this woman is going to come into our town, stir our shit up, and then go home, and she's not going to have to deal with the consequences of all of that.
Yeah. It's interesting because we haven't met Susan Day. I suspect we will meet Susan Day.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see what kind of character she actually is, because there's a lot of different ways we could go with it, right? You know, like I you know, it was funny. This passage reminded me of the fact that I was briefly part of a political organization in college, you know, very briefly, because I had better things to do. But it was interesting because like they would actually just do shit just to do it. Like it was like a social, it was like fun for them
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, stand outside with protest signs at some particular thing. And it's like, no, it was not part of some grand theory to change the law in the United States. It was just like, well, what are we going to do this week? I guess we'll protest the that thing. And
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like that is a kind of person. Like the cop's not exaggerating. There are indeed people who just want to you know, cheer for their team, and or maybe even create a whole event for cheering at their team that wouldn't have existed otherwise. There's definitely people who are involved in politics largely for tribal reasons like that. It's just a question of, is Susan Day going to be that kind of person, or is Susan Day a true believer who thinks that her work is necessary and vital? I really do predict at this point that we are going to meet Susan Day, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, certainly. I like that framing a lot, because I think, and I think Susan Day could be a person that is both of those things, and you know, a little of some, a little of the other. You know, I don't know, but I like that a lot. I think there's some complicated stuff going on here, and I think it's very easy to read a statement like this and see that this book is kind of declaring the debate about abortion stupid and unnecessary. And I don't think that's what it's doing. I think you're right that we need to frame this as, this is one character in the story's opinion on this whole thing. And it's an understandable opinion coming from the person who is responsible for making sure that nobody kills each other when this woman walks in their town. I think we, especially with political topics as incendiary as this one, it is very easy to quickly, you know, land on judgment. And I think, you know, the first time I read this book, I remember getting to this section and being like, ooh, Stephen, really? But I don't think that's fair. And I think especially with what's on all of our minds right now, when it seems like, at least for the time being, the law in Texas has been changed. This is especially, I will say it is weird to be reading this book right now. I did not think this was going to be a thing in 2021 in America, and it's become a thing. It's a big deal, and we're going to have to, there's going to be a lot of fighting and legal maneuvering before this is all sussed out. It's I guess it was a little unexpected this all happened at the same time we're reading this book. And I felt weird. I felt weird while it was happening.
I felt like last week we were just saying, like, this is basically a done deal. This is a 90s issue, but
yeah,
we're no longer talking about this as a society. And then bam, this happens. I was like, this is fucking surreal.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm having trouble sleeping, and now this happens. What's going on?
What's going on with this book? Yeah,
it's all 19.
It is. But yeah, I mean, I think we'll kind of see where this shakes out. I'm really interested to see and really study this issue, because I mean, it's both the central issue of this book and not the central issue of this book, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of the plot issue of the story is abortion, but Ralph, as we've said, Ralph has no buy-in to that argument at all. He doesn't really care one way or the other, and so it can't be the central, like, internal narrative conflict of Ralph Roberts, because he doesn't care.
Yeah, right. That makes me very interested to see how that all ends up connecting. Yeah,
for sure. So this conversation eventually moves over to Charlie Pickering, who we learn will probably rot in a jail cell for a while his instigator, Rooster Ed, as Ralph has begun calling him, will remain free. I really love this beat that Ralph is kind of horrified to realize he feels bad for Charlie, for the person who stabbed him, because he so easily got used. Yeah,
that's very Ralph, isn't it?
It is very Ralph, and I mean, I think he's a very empathetic person. And I think, seeing and realizing someone was just used as a tool of someone else is something that he's going to feel passionately about, especially right now when he's kind of getting this general feeling that he's being used as a tool by someone else or something else.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So the conversation eventually turns over to May Locker, to which Leidecker basically says the police are very, very confused because she was an old lady with emphysema, and it seems very obvious that she just died of natural causes. But then they got this anonymous phone call from some random person who refused to identify themselves about some creepy guys in front of her house. And also the doors were all locked from the inside. So they've created Ralph has inadvertently created a mystery here in which there can't be a solution, because just seems like she died of a heart attack and the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ralph, I don't remember if Ralph is the one who thinks this or if this was something that I thought of myself, but like, if they're invisible, maybe they can also just like go through doors. Oh yeah. He does think of this because he realizes he didn't actually see them touch the door.
Yeah. He basically was convinced that he saw them walk through the door, like not like materialize through, but like open the door, close the door, and walk out of the door. He had convinced himself that he saw that, but when he actually went back and thought about it, no, he did not see that. He just saw them on the stoop. So yeah, there was that beat where he kind of says, "What did they just walk through the door? Did they just walk through walls?" And he's like, "Why not, Ralph? They're little bald men that only I can see. Why not? Why not?"
Because it's crazy, but yeah, right.
But I love, like, Leidecker's so confused, because like, if this guy was legit, why didn't he identify himself? Why would someone lie? And of course it's because they think they're crazy and they don't want to expose themselves in that way.
Yeah. And apparently they have a really young and strong sounding voice.
Yeah. That is really interesting, right? And to kind of combine with that, before they conclude the conversation, Leidecker like gives Ralph an up and down and is like, "Man, you look really good. Like, I can't believe that the honey that I cured your insomnia with is doing this. You look better than you did a year ago." And that's a head scratcher, isn't it?
I mean, it makes you wonder, like, okay, is he literally de-aging? Is he becoming younger? Like, not just, oh, he looks like a healthy 70-year-old. but like, is he actually becoming younger? Which would be a very interesting thing to do with a character who is afraid of becoming old. Because there is a kind of terrible irony to it, because it's like, well, it's not like he just wants to be young. It's more complicated than that, right? It's much more complicated than that. Being old is almost like just the visible sign of the problem, which is that his wife is dead, and and all of his friends are dying, and he is depressed.
You kind of wonder how much Ralph would mind being old if Carolyn was still around, right? Like, did this not become a problem to him until he lost his life partner?
Yeah.
Because just a symbol of losing things.
Right. I mean, we didn't really know him that well before, but I feel like you're right, though.
I also really like this part as well. So if the 911 caller was on the up and up, and if May Locker was dead when the two guys left, who locked the doors? Maybe it was the Crimson King, Ralph thought, and to his horror, almost said aloud. So once again, kind of drawing a line between him and Ed Deep now, right? Like, if he starts spouting off about the Crimson King too, Jesus, what's that going to look like?
Right. And kind of emphasizes the fact that he's still not entirely with it if he's like about to blurt things out, and he does have this tendency to talk to himself. So. Yeah.
I mean, it is, I think, very easy to forget how fucking exhausted Ralph is. I said this at the very beginning of the first episode we did on this book. It's like you kind of get swept up into what's happening to him and the auras and the doctors, and it's very easy to forget the instigating thing of this seems to be his lack of sleep. And so there is always this tinge, even as people say how good he looks, how healthy he looks, he feels exhausted. He feels like he hasn't slept in forever.
And that's just so interesting, because you'd think like somebody's seeming tired isn't just in the sallowness of their eye sockets. It's in their whole demeanor. And when somebody says like, you look great, then that must mean that he's like standing up straight and speaking articulately, right? He must be looking at them with alert eyes, even though he's as exhausted as he is.
Yeah, you're right. It seems to lend a supernatural tinge on it.
Yes,
if that's the case.
Indeed.
So the chapter concludes with Ralph sitting up once again, this time at 1:45 in the morning, trying to decide if he is indeed going crazy, trying to decide if he saw the doctors open May's door or not. He decides finally that he needs to talk to someone about this, and finds that the only person possible is Bill McGovern. And I love the conclusion of this chapter. Ralph thought of the satiric raised eyebrow, the unfailing cynicism, the long face always so gloomy, the literary allusions, which usually made Ralph smile, but often left him feeling a tad inferior as well. Then there was McGovern's attitude toward Lois, condescending, even a touch cruel. Yet this was a long way from being fair, and Ralph knew it. Bill McGovern was capable of kindness, and perhaps far more important in this case, understanding. He and Ralph had known each other for over 20 years. For the last 10 of those years, they had lived in the same building. He had been one of Carolyn's pallbearers, and if Ralph couldn't talk to Bill about what had been happening to him, who could he talk to? So I think there's a lot to talk about here, actually, Matt. The line that stood out to me specifically was, and then there was McGovern's attitude towards Lois, condescending, even a touch cruel. We haven't seen that in McGovern and Lois's interactions. And I know Ralph follows that up with, hey, that's not fair. But he said he's not saying that last line I said was not fair. He's saying my general attitude towards him is not a fair one. He can be a kind person. Right. I haven't the McGovern that is being described here is not the one that we've seen, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain interpretation that Ralph has some unconscious bias against McGovern, and it's filtering through and coloring his perceptions of things. Like, where, maybe, for example, when McGovern is doing the thing where he pretends to dance with Lois or whatever, give her like an ostentatious dip or something. Ralph is perceiving that as like sarcastic and cruel, as he says here. And it's like, well, maybe he just is playing around and he's a silly guy and he's just having fun with his friend. And he and you're just seeing him this way. And I mean, it could be all sorts of reasons. I mean, it could be that he's literally just prejudiced against him because he's gay, and that's a believable thing for somebody who's born in the 20s or whatever. It could be that he's like resents his friendship with Caroline. It could be all sorts of things, but I've felt for some time that there's like something under the surface with his relationship with McGovern that needs to be unearthed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that the satirical raised eyebrow, the long face, always so gloomy, right? Ralph calling someone else gloomy is really ironic at the moment, since Ralph is he's in a very bad place right now. I think there is part of him that recognizes some of his issues in McGovern and therefore is predisposed to be negative towards it. Because I mean, one thing we have definitely seen about Bill McGovern is he is the type of person that complains about being old a lot, right? Like this is something that we've seen from him again and again, is like, oh, getting old, it's so awful, and like have this kind of I think the unfailing cynicism that Ralph is thinking about here is related to his kind of constant griping about being old. But that's like, again, that's a reflection of Ralph's own internal things. He's just the type of guy that keeps that shit inside and doesn't like audibly complain about it to other people. I don't know. There is a lot going on here for sure.
There's sort of a narcissism of small differences thing happening where he has so much in common with McGovern that it rankles him. That like, it's that thing where it's like we're having exactly the same problems, but he's having them wrong. Wouldn't it be hilarious if Bill has like been having insomnia the whole time? He didn't even know it. That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so let's move into this conversation. I think we're moving into chapter 10, and I think this is a pretty big chapter in my opinion. So there's a lot to say here. The chapter begins with Ralph kind of greeting the day, ready to spill everything to Bill. And I love how the opening of this chapter kind of paints Ralph's optimism, right? Like he goes on for almost 2 whole pages about how this is the perfect day. It's downright gorgeous. There's not going to be a day this gorgeous again until next year. You really get the feeling, in my opinion, at least, that Ralph feels like this conversation with Bill is not solve his problem per se, but like by inviting someone else into his world, he'll at least get some of the pressure taken off himself. He'll at least know one way or another if he's crazy. It seems like he's made a plan and this is going to be the thing that helps him. And he's so positive about it, which of course makes what happens even worse.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny how much like we want it to go well also. Because, Ralph, we know he needs to share all this madness with somebody. We want him to find somebody that he can talk this through with. Yeah. And so we're like, okay, good. Thank God he's going to tell McGovern. But yeah.
Yeah. I like what you said about finding his quartet, because I think that's something that, coming from Dark Tower and reading these books in that perspective, we've kind of been trained to do. We've kind of been trained to look for the team that's going to get together to vanquish the bad. And we had it in every single Dark Tower book. We had it in Salem's Lot, and it hasn't happened here. So yeah, we are kind of waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Ralph's optimism here and his happiness here maybe is part of the reason why he reacts so damn strongly to things not going the way he thought they were going to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there could be something there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So he goes out for a morning walk to kill some time before Bill wakes up, and on his way back, the Aura world returns to him again. Like he says, like exploding the world in more color than he had ever seen. And this made me think, because I've been attempting to be clever here and like pay attention to when and where the auras are choosing to pop up in the story, and like when they don't, to see if I can come up with like a very clear delineating factors. Like this is why this is happening. This is, and what why this is happening is saying, but I can't come up with any kind of pattern here at all. I'm wondering if you had noticed anything.
Not at all. It seems intentionally random to me. I mean, it's day or night, indoor or outdoor, around other people or alone. Doesn't seem related to who he's been talking to recently or what he's thinking about. No pattern that I can find.
Yeah, not necessarily even connected to his emotional state either, because he's been in a wide range of emotional states when this stuff shows up. So.
Yep. Yeah.
But we do see here that Ralph is so absorbed in the world of auras that he almost runs right into Mrs. Perrin, which is a 80-something-year-old woman that lives on his street. I love this. Look out, Roberts. Watch where you're going, can't you? The words, harsh and a little alarmed, seem to have actual physical texture. It was like running a hand over oak paneling in some ancient abbey or ancestral hall. So, like, we're getting to be more than just color here now, Matt. Like, the words had texture to them. Like, he's seeing like dialogue trees now.
Yeah. His psychic powers are kind of turning into like a full bore synesthetic overlay where he just like he sees what's underneath everything. It's very cool.
Yeah. Mrs. Perrin is another little fascinating, like, brief King character we get. We just treated to a few pages of her. We see her described as over 80, but not giving into it so much as an inch. And in her short time, we see that she offers to mend Ralph's clothes for him because Carolyn was a friend of hers. And then we get this little bit here. Terrible about May Locker, wasn't it? No, Mrs. Perrin said. God's mercy. I think that's a fascinating little line too, because I think it shows both Ralph and Mrs. Perrin are old. She's older than him, but their view on death is very different, right?
Yeah.
Like, he sees what happened to May as a tragedy. And she's like, no, she was a woman long suffering from emphysema. She was not going to get better. We already kind of had the outcome painted for us, you know, via this beautiful imagery of like the speeding up of oxygen tanks being delivered, that it started with one every 2 weeks. Now it's 2-3 times a week. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse until she's going to eventually pass away. And to a woman like Mrs. Perrin, that is seen as mercy, that she was able to move on. But Ralph can't see it that way, because his view on death is not that at all.
It's so interesting because she's portrayed as, like you just said, she's 80, but not giving an inch. But she has this attitude toward death where you kind of feel like if, you know, she were to just have a stroke, she would just be like, all right, you know, it's my time. Whereas Ralph, who does struggle with growing old, he wants to not be growing old, and he's super not comfortable with the idea of death.
Yeah.
And I mean, sort of obviously, because he just lost someone, the most important person to him, and he's just like this is horrible. This is the worst thing ever. Why would I be okay with this?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, to frame this differently, like, yes, it's like death is awful, and I never want to. I hate it. I hate death so much. But like, could you not argue that there is some mercy to Carolyn finally going? That like she had this terrible tumor like eating away at her brain. At some point, it is mercy that she gets to stop suffering from that. Like, the whole concept of death is awful, but like in some cases, like this, if a person is truly suffering without hope in that regard, like I don't know. I'm not even quite sure what I'm trying to say there.
No,
but
I mean, I'm pretty anti-death, but I see the validity of that argument. If there's no hope for someone, if it's just suffering, then I think it does become something like a mercy. Although, you know, I think
it doesn't make it feel better for sure.
The better option would be to just cure all disease and not have people who are stuck in endless, pointless suffering.
Yeah, that would be good. Let's do that.
That's my. I think I would just cut the wire answer to your dichotomy.
Yeah, I think, you know, the brain type disease is the stuff that scares me the most, because like just the idea that like you stop being you is what terrifies me. So totally. I'm scared. I'm with you on this one, Ralph. I'm scared of this whole thing, and I'm half your age, so I can't imagine what I'm going to be like by the time I'm 70. But
right. It's so interesting how many older people he's run into. There's so many older people in this book.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't. You're right that the young people that he's interacted with so far are really just Helen and Natalie.
Right.
I mean, Leidecker is a younger man, but like his life is surrounded by old people.
Yeah.
Sure.
His age and older, basically.
Yeah. I do think, you just like pointed out that she's described as not giving 80 an inch. I wonder if she would describe herself that way. Like, this strikes to me as a very Ralph type description. Like she just like, she looks like she's refusing to let old age get her down. I wonder if she's just like, no, I'm just like living my life. Like, what am I going to do? What do you want me to do?
Right. you want me to be moping around because I mean, maybe she is in pain, but like,
yeah,
you can only complain about being in pain for so many decades before it becomes boring.
Yeah, I love that Mrs. Perrin walks away, and this contrast between the straight as an arrow Mrs. Perrin and this world of auras and colors that he's seeing is almost too much for Ralph, and he kind of just doubles over laughing like some kind of no good teenager.
Or like he's going insane.
Yeah. So Ralph finally gets back to Bill and starts to tell him everything, especially about the little bald doctors. And there's a lot to talk about in this conversation, Matt, but the one thing I wanted to highlight before we get into the rest of it is there's this moment where Bill gets super pissed off at Ralph for like flashing a hint of a doubt on his face about Bill's ability to respect a confidence. I think this is so wonderful because King actually set this up earlier in last chapter. We didn't talk about it at the time because I knew we were going to talk about it here, but when Ralph asks Leidecker about what happened with May, his response is basically, well, I'm not supposed to tell people this, and I'm worried about telling you, not because of you, but because of your roommate and his ability to keep a secret. And that's really interesting because that's not a thing about Bill we've known, but it makes it clear that this is an opinion of Bill that is a widespread one, that like more than just Ralph has this opinion of him. And we're not sure like why Leidecker would think that about Bill. We just don't know enough about him, but King plants that seed here, and Bill's defensiveness to that makes it seem like he is very clearly aware that people think this of him because he's very, very defensive about it.
Yeah, it does seem like a sore spot with him. It is really interesting. I mean, McGovern puts out a persona of being kind of cynical, kind of sarcastic, kind of aloof. I think it's probably easy to peg him as being like an unserious person who you shouldn't trust with secrets.
Yeah.
But then, I was reflecting on this, and when you think about the life that he's lived, he's probably had to carry all sorts of secrets.
Yeah. I mean, he's been carrying his own.
Yeah.
For who knows how long. Like, again, this is a thing, like, we don't know who he's out to, right? Like, all we know for sure is Ralph, and we could probably say Lois. We could probably assume Carolyn as well. But we don't know. And yeah, we'd also know that he kept his teacher and mentor Bob's secret, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, but maybe there's something that people know where it's like, oh, Bill McGovern, let slip this one piece of information that led to this terrible thing happening at one point in history, and maybe that's like a backstory element that's being set up. It's going to be revealed at some point. I don't know.
But isn't it like? I agree, but wouldn't this be a perfect time to drop that information if you're Stephen King? If you're like, oh, and the reason why Leidecker doesn't trust this guy at all is because of this, this, and this, right, or because he's got a reputation as the town gossip because of this, this, and this, and it's just not there. It's really just not. And I don't know. I find that really, really interesting because obviously this is you're right. It's a very sore spot for Bill. But Ralph's perspective is so limited at times that we just don't get to see the broader scope of some of this stuff. It's like he's not even thinking about it, and so therefore we don't get to see it.
I think this is just kind of yet more Ralph being unfair to Bill and not even thinking about it.
I do think this is kind of clever in more ways than one, though, because the rest of this conversation will play out with Bill hitting a very specific nerve of Ralph's and him getting immediately offensive. And so I think we've kind of subtly prepared been prepared for this by this introductory salvo of the conversation being one character gets very immediately pissed off at the other for hitting a nerve, because we're going to do that again, but in reverse, and it's not going to go well at all. So King is really doing a good job of like preparing us emotionally for this, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like that. Yeah, I mean, I think both of these men have a lot of sore spots, and unfortunately, they're both managing to poke each other right in those sore spots in this conversation. And I mean, the question will be whether they can get over themselves and swallow their pride and do what needs to be done, or whether they're going to just piss each other off and be alienated.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get into the rest of that conversation in a bit, but first, when Bill goes up to call May Locker's brother to get some information on how she actually died, Ralph sees another bald doctor, Matt. This one is a little bit different. This one is skipping rope and singing what is called the clapping song, which is a song that was released by Shirley Ellis in 1965. It took some lyrics from another song called Little Rubber Dolly in 1930s that had also probably just some lyrics from some children's songs generally. But we know this is the 1960s version of the song because the 3-6-9 part of it was added in that version. So we know that. But here's the song this little bald doctor is singing. 3-6-9, the goose drank wine, the monkey chewed tobacco on the streetcar line. The line broke, the monkey got choked, and they all went to heaven in a little rowboat. So, death again, Matt. Death.
That's yep. I mean, just like all children's songs, it's nightmarish, but this is one I've never heard, and it's just creepy. I love it.
It is. It's very ominous. Once again, talking about death, and it's more than just the song though, because when Ralph saw the first two doctors, he described them, as we talked about, casually, not feeling any sense of danger, comparing them to blue collar workers, just having a chat. But when he sees this bald doctor, he says something very, very different. Ralph had first taken the hat-shadowed face for that of a child because it was utterly smooth, unmarked by so much as a single line. And yet, despite that, it conveyed a clear feeling to Ralph, a sense of evil, of malignity beyond the comprehension of a sane mind. So that's a very different description, right? Like this same type of person, but very different emotional reaction to him.
Yeah, right.
And of course, we'll see another reason for that is like, unless the last two doctors, this one sees Ralph, smiles at him, grins an insane evil grin at him, and then points at him.
Yeah, right. It's once their attention is on him, they can reveal their evil nature, right?
Sure.
It's pretty creepy. Yeah. Love it.
And the last little bit here is that this little bald doctor number 3, is wearing Bill McGovern's missing Panama hat.
Well, crap.
I mean, don't you?
I don't know what that means, but
yeah, we don't know what it means. But like, if we try to build some imagery out of this, he's about to resume this conversation with Bill, and this is Bill's token being held by this incredibly evil, malign being. So it almost is predictive of how this is going to go, right?
Yeah. You could also take it as a threat, as like, we can reach out and touch you and your friends. I grabbed this guy's hat, and again, I'm starting to make assumptions here, but like, can Bill see the doctor now? Like, does it look like a child to him, or is it just invisible?
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, and I didn't think we did know, but in either case, if Bill can't see the doctor, that means that like the hat has been like stolen into the Dark Souls dimension or whatever, or whatever game that is I'm thinking of. And so like that kind of implies like when anytime somebody points at you while making an evil grin, I'll take that as a threat.
Sure.
Or even a threat to Bill McGovern too. Like, so, yeah, I don't know. It's very, raising the stakes. The fact that the little bald doctors know that he's aware of them, I feel like is a big escalation, actually.
Yeah, and he's reeling from this whole thing during this entire Bill conversation, and that's I think what another level to this conversation that becomes so interesting is not only does Bill hit a nerve in Ralph, but he's also like freaking the fuck out about what just happened, that this little evil doctor pointed at him, and in his mind, as he says, like, he's marked me, I've been marked, now they're gonna come for me. Like, he's freaking the fuck out. And so, like, I think that takes what is already probably going to be a bad conversation and escalates it even further.
I think you're right.
But first, Bill returns, and we learn, I think this is marvelous, because we learn that 45 minutes have gone by, that Bill was on the phone for 45 minutes while Ralph was observing this little bald doctor. It felt like, to him and to us reading it, moments, right? It was just like a couple minutes. He's looking around, he sees a kid skipping rope. Oh, wait, that's not a kid. That's a creepy man. But 45 minutes went by.
Right. I mean, did he fall asleep? Did he zone out? Like, well, it's that we definitely weren't aware of it. Like, we wouldn't have guessed that. And that, I think that shows us that Ralph is sort of becoming an unreliable narrator, actually.
Yeah. We know the thing that I love about it is that Bill notices, right, that Ralph is not very good at hiding things, and he sees the shock on his face when he learns at 45 minutes. He sees him look at his watch, and he makes assumptions on his health using that information. Because we see here that Bill learns that May died of natural causes, and Bill doesn't believe Ralph. He doesn't believe anything he's saying. I mean, it's not that he doesn't believe him. He believes that there's a source of all this stuff, and it is Ralph's insomnia, that he's hallucinating things. Right. And he's not thinking clearly. And he says the wrong word. He says, "I don't care about that spray can or old door," McGovern cried. "I care about you. You've been suffering from insomnia since April or May. You've been depressed and disturbed ever since Carolyn died." "I have not been depressed," Ralph shouted. Oops. God. Said the D word.
How dare McGovern say the obvious observation? I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, and this just makes you love McGovern, though, because, like, he is paying attention. He is aware that Ralph is suffering. He's God, it's just sad, right? Because you're like, these guys should be on the same side, but there's just this misunderstanding.
Yeah, he genuinely wants to help him, and he just doesn't accept that this stuff's really happening, which is very understandable, because who would? What he's seeing is his friend suffering and hurting, and you wonder if, like, there's a moment when Ralph starts talking that Bill is, like, super relieved, is like that he knew something was wrong with Ralph, but he also knew Ralph was the type of person that you can't push them on it. He has to come to you first. And so he's like, "Oh, good, we're finally going to do this." And then Ralph started talking more and more, and he's like, "Oh no, oh no. Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!"
Right.
And he knows he has to confront him. And in, like, he seems like a smart man. I think he knew what his reaction of calling him depressed and disturbed, like, to bringing up Carolyn, to play the Carolyn card. I think he knew what Ralph's reaction to that was going to be, but he's too worried to care about that.
Yeah, I think he just feels like it has to be said at this point. Mm-hmm. He knows that things have progressed far enough that his friend is probably going crazy. That was a fun part about the scene, actually, was you trying to, like, figure out what McGovern was actually thinking about what Ralph was saying. Because Ralph is like, "Oh, he's listening to me, this is going great." and then you get this vibe that Bill's like, "Yeah, that's great, Ralph. Let me just go inside for a second and make some calls. You stay here." And you're like, "No."
Yeah, I mean, Ralph even thinks that, right? That he's calling up Leidecker or someone else. There's an interesting wrinkle in this we haven't really talked about yet, which is Leidecker has a copy of the 911 call that was made about May, and, like, we're led to believe that as the police continue to investigate this really weird 911 call that happened, that he's going to listen to that tape eventually and probably recognize Ralph's voice on it. And what the hell is going to happen then, right? Like, how are you going to explain to this guy you just had a conversation with why you did what you did? And so, like, I think it's, this conversation with Bill and then that stacked on top of each other, Ralph seems to be digging a hole for himself that he's increasingly unable to explain his way out of.
Yeah, we're just making making things more and more tense and tenuous, and
Mhm.
there's gonna be something's gonna break at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I love this, the kind of the last thing that Bill says to him. And then in a deceptively light voice, McGovern said the thing Ralph had been dreading all along. You want to watch out, old son. You're starting to sound too much like Ed Deep now for comfort. Which is like the exact thing he was worrying about, like the exact thing he was nervous about. And so Ralph deals with it like any old man would. He storms off. And if he was a teenager, he would slam his door behind him. But he storms off down the street. It's interesting because in this moment, like Bill is yelling at him and Ralph is kind of yelling back. And like everyone around them is noticing this and like coming out of their houses and out of the stores and like paying attention to these two men having a screaming match in the middle of the street. And this is like throughout the book so far, Ralph has been a very self-conscious type of person where he does not like drawing attention to himself. He does not like feeling like he's being judged or teased by people. And this looks like two crazy old men screaming at each other, and he doesn't even care. Like he just is like, fuck it, I don't care. I'm out. I'm walking away. Yeah.
Yeah. I found the ending actually kind of abrupt. The ending of this section where he just kind of walks away basically. Yeah.
Yeah. But we have this part where the chapter comes to an end and the part comes to an end. And I think this is worth talking about because there's some interesting stuff that happens in this paragraph here, Matt. And now Ralph began to see the old people of Harris Avenue, the ones who bought their insurance from companies that advertised on cable TV, the ones with the gallstones and the skin tumors, the ones whose memories were diminishing even as their prostates enlarged, the ones who were living on Social Security and peering at the world through thickening cataracts instead of rose-colored glasses. These were the people who now read all the mail which came addressed to occupant and scanned the supermarket advertising circulars for specials on canned goods and generic frozen dinners. He saw them dressed in grotesque short pants and fluffy short skirts, saw them wearing beanies and t-shirts which showcased such characters as Beavis and Butthead and Rude Dog. He saw them, in short, as the world's oldest preschoolers. They were marching around a double row of chairs as a small bald man in a white smock played Pop Goes the Weasel on the piano. Another baldy filched the chairs one by one, and when the music stopped and everyone sat down, one person, this time it had been May Locker, next time it would probably be McGovern's old department head, was left standing. That person would have to leave the room, of course, and Ralph heard McGovern laughing because he'd found a seat again. Maybe May Lochner was dead, Bob Polhurst dying, Ralph Roberts losing his marbles, but he was still all right. William D. McGovern, Esquire, was still fine, still dandy, still vertical and taking nourishment, still able to find a chair when the music stopped. Wow.
I see. I don't think that's being entirely fair to old Bill there. I mean,
it's terrible to Bill.
Bill's just as been out of shape about all of his friends dying as Ralph is.
Yeah. At what point in your conversations with Bill would he be like laughing gleefully because Bob is next and not me? He's devastated and grieving the death of his friend.
Right.
He's also devastated and grieving Ralph's wife.
Right.
He also was sitting there thinking about May Locker, who he visited regularly, and he waved it off sarcastically as like, oh, just reliving my glory days. But no, he cared about this person, and she was dying, and he felt bad about it. Yeah. But not that Ralph can't see that.
Yeah, it's mean. I mean, the stuff about the little ball doctors being the ones pulling out the chairs does make some interesting connections to the idea that they're the ones, clipping the balloon strings. But yeah, I'm so invested in this relationship that has really never gone well as far as we can tell. But I want them to be friends because I think it's fundamentally because we love Ralph, but we know that Ralph is not being reasonable, or kind or generous at all in his sort of bias toward Bill, and that he should be. It's an own goal. He's hurting himself by not trusting Bill. So
I also really like the beginning of this paragraph too, where Ralph like makes this very broad and cruel swipe at old people, of which he considers himself one. Like this very like just dumping into every single old people stereotype, right? And like focusing on their physical deficiencies as they age, like people who bought their insurance from companies that advertise on cable TV. Like it's really fascinating. And then the image of taking those old people and putting them in the world's oldest preschoolers. That's a really interesting idea too, right? Like this idea that being old is in the end almost infantilizing, because we are like at the whim of the world and the doctors pulling chairs out. Really interesting stuff.
I think that's a big part of what he finds so objectionable about it is losing control. Yeah,
definitely. It's good stuff. I think it's a really, I agree with you. It's an abrupt ending, but I think it's a really powerful ending. It's like, you feel the end of the part. You feel like we're moving on to a new section of the novel because I guess if you had to predict, what is Ralph's longer term reaction to this going to be? Because I don't think it's going to be like, well, that didn't go well, let me try someone else.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, ultimately, I think he's going to try to tell Lois like later in the story. But I think right now he's like, okay, that was a disaster. Obviously, people are going to think I'm crazy if I share this. It's going to have to, something much more serious is going to have to happen where he feels like he doesn't have a choice before he tells somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right there. All right. Well, that is the end of chapter 10 and the end of our reading for the week, Matt. We did it.
Awesome.
Next week, we are going to begin part 2, and we will be reading the next 3 chapters. So that will be, I believe, 11, 12, and 13. Let me triple check that. Yes, 11, 12, and 13 is what we'll be reading next week. But before we finish this week's episode, we have to get to our discussion question. We asked you last week, who is your favorite old, like 70-ish year old character in fiction? And we got a lot of responses, Matt. This is a great responses. I'm looking forward to discussing these with you.
Awesome. So first from Walking Dude 22. In response to your question, I've tried thinking of central characters defined by their age, and frankly, not many come to mind. I am extending my response into movies as well. My all-time favorite is William Mooney from the film Unforgiven. The last 10 minutes of that movie are among the best ever filmed. Mooney is perhaps a character, I don't know, maybe it's money, is perhaps a character, is perhaps a changed man who lives with the ghosts of his past, but makes a last chance grab at a bounty that requires him to face that past. In literature, there is a fisherman from Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, which may be the saddest story ever written. King has written several side characters who are older, Judd Crandall from Pet Sematary or Dick Halloran from The Shining. They show up and play a mentorship role for the characters, and then they exit stage right with a big old God bomb. Cool.
I like that. I like that.
I don't know if I've seen Unforgiven, actually.
Oh, man, we got to watch that.
The Old Man in the Sea is indeed very, very sad.
And that he is an old man.
He is an old man, and there's the sea.
I'm really, one day we're going to have to read Pet Sematary, and I'm afraid. For reasons I can't even really get into with you, because that would ruin the story for you.
Okay,
but
great.
I'm very afraid of reading that book and talking about that book. And oh boy, the people that have read it / watched it know why. But it's a rough one. Let me just say that this is one of the ones that like Tabitha King was like, "You sure about this one, Steve? You sure this is you sure? You sure?"
Where did that fall in his career, by the way?
83. So
pretty early.
Yeah, fairly early. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
All right. Next we have, I'm guessing it's hockey goalie. It's HKY goalie 30.
Okay.
But of course, my favorite old character, it's a little cheating, has to be Roland, as he's 1,000 years old. An honorable mention has to be the supporting characters in Dr. Sleep, which is also a little cheating. I could say that without spoiling Dr. Sleep too much, but yeah, I guess technically Roland's an old man, and Roland's old manness is definitely part of his character as the Dark Tower carries on.
Yeah, sure. I'll buy that.
Yeah, I'll allow it.
Yeah. Pear Jane says, as you mentioned, not a lot of entertainment features an old person as a protagonist. The fact that I can name specific movies or shows where that happens, Grace and Frankie, Grumpy Old Men, is evidence of that. But a lot of side characters are older folks, and often they're there to offer either wisdom or a fish out of water angle. So I'm going with Jerry Gary Larry on Parks and Recreation. He's 61 at the start of the show, but less is made of him being the old guy than his being the butt of everyone's jokes. As the show evolves, we find out he's warm, kind, and humble, and not at all as incompetent as everyone in the office makes him out to be. In fact, he's literally married to a supermodel, has 3 supermodel daughters who adore him, and is a talented piano player and artist. He's clumsy and fumbles at work, which makes him a target, and his age is likely what makes everyone accepting of him. In his humility, he's occasionally frustrated by their meanness, but never judges them for it. I'm not aware of this character, but that sounds funny.
You haven't watched Parks and Rec? See, you do not watch near enough Michael Schur shows for my taste.
This is true.
You haven't watched The Good Place. You probably haven't watched any Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Nope.
Did you even watch The Office?
I have watched The Office, and I've watched the whole Office, yes.
I actually like Parks and Rec better than The Office, I think. I don't know if I don't know. I was never a huge Office person, so
it's a very reliable product. I'll say that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my wife and I rewatched the entire show during the pandemic. We watched all of The Office, so I enjoy it. But I don't know. There's something about Parks and Rec that I just really, really loved, and definitely Jerry is one of those pieces for sure.
Sounds fun.
So next we have Code Donahoe 89, who says Augustus Gus McCrae and Woodrow F. Call from Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. In the book, they aren't quite as old as their miniseries adaptation, portrayed by Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones, but they exude a certain older charm. Gus, the still fun-loving, excitable, hopeless romantic, and Call, the stoic, grumpy old man with many regrets. As the story unfolds, both in text and on screen, the layers of their personality peel back, and you learn a lot about who they have become as elderly gentlemen is by and large just what they want you to see. It's just the walls that they have put up to fortify themselves. And by the end, it truly is hard not to break down and cry. Oh, man. Lonesome Dove is one of those books that I've had on my list for so long. I really just need to get around to reading it. I really, really want to. I've heard so many good things, especially last year when Larry McMurtry passed away. I just really wanted to read it. We need to do this. We need to do a book club on this.
We need to do a We Pick 'em book club because I don't think it's going to get voted for, but that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next, Emperor Fry the Solid says, yes, another question with an anime answer. Spoilers for the first 10 minutes of one of the most popular Miyazaki movies.
Oh.
So Sophie from Howl's Moving Castle is also cheating like the other answers, but I love how committed she is to being old. The second, a witch turns her from a teenager into an old woman. She's like, well, time to find a frumpier hat. And then I mentioned my bones. It's an important part of her characterization, of course, and I just love the story it tells about her self-identity.
Let me just say that Miyazaki is the exception to all anime rules, so this is fine.
I mean, we figured this out. Miyazaki is not anime.
Yeah, it's true.
Avatar: The Last Airbender is anime.
Yeah,
it's hard to predict these things.
But I have declared myself the official anime decider, and what I say goes. So there we go.
Yep. And nobody in the world is mad about that.
Nobody. Why would they be? I mean, it was the power granted upon me by
God.
Me. By God, yes. All right, Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, so there are a few classic old guys from some quintessential movies of my youth, including Mr. Miyagi, Henry Jones Sr., and Curly from City Slickers. All three are pretty badass old men who can still kick ass despite their age. You two have already established how amazing Richard Farnsworth was in Misery, and he was equally incredible in The Straight Story, a brilliant movie from David Lynch that must be mentioned here. However, in my estimation, the absolute best elderly character is Carl from Disney's Up. Carl, played to a curmudgeonly perfection by Ed Asner, has a lot in common with our Insomnia hero. They are both elderly men who have recently lost their wives and are not quite sure how to live out the rest of their days alone. In the first 10 minutes of the movie, we see the life story of Carl and his wife Ellie told in a montage. No dialogue, just effective visuals artfully edited together with evocative music. It is pure poetry and utterly heartbreaking. No matter how many times I see it, it always makes me cry. Before he's forced to give up his house and move into a nursing home, Carl decides to live out his and Ellie's lifelong dream of finding the mysterious Paradise Falls. So he ties hundreds of helium balloons to his house, and up it goes, with the stowaway kid in tow. Carl eventually learns that it's not where you end up that's important, but the people that you meet and form a relationship with along the way that matters. Ellie didn't care that she never saw Paradise Falls. She had all she wanted with her life with Carl.
Yeah,
beautiful movie, especially meaningful now that just last week Ed Asner passed away. He lived to a ripe old age of 91, but
yeah,
so good for him.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that movie does always make me cry several times.
It's very good
at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end. Crying, just crying the whole time.
Definitely Pixar doing what it does the absolute best, for sure.
And it's just funny. It's just such a strange movie. It's like it's like, who's this for? It's got this elderly protagonist, and like other people pointed out in their answers, it's just very unusual to have an elderly protagonist, much less in a movie for children. But it works so well. It's so unique.
I want to go watch Up now.
Yeah, me too. All right, next from Groovy Cheese 81. My answer to the discussion question has to be Mickey from the Rocky movies. Burgess Meredith does a magnificent job expressing Mickey's initial scorn for Rocky, humility when Rocky gets the title shot, and eventual love for the boxer. For me, the movies are summed up beautifully by one line of Mickey's. "Get up, you lousy bum, because Mickey loves ya."
I was hoping you would get to do a Burgess Meredith impression.
Of course.
So it's time for Scott's semi-annual. You need to go watch Rocky if you haven't watched Rocky. Rocky is, for those that don't know, like my favorite movie ever. I love this movie, and therefore I love this answer. I think the thing I'll say is, if you've never seen Rocky, if you've never seen any of the Rocky movies, but especially the first Rocky, I'm just going to say you're wrong about what you think Rocky is, because like the cultural conversation around Rocky usually stems from what Rocky 4 is, which is a very different movie than what Rocky 1 is. And Rocky is this very muted, dramatic character study, and it's one of the best movies of all time, and you should go watch it.
There's very little boxing in Rocky. that was what surprised me. It's kind of like Rambo. The first Rambo movie, another Stallone vehicle, is nothing like what people visualize when they think of Rambo.
Yeah,
it's nothing at all like it.
Yep, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. All right. AL84001 says there is no acceptable answer except Miracle Max from Princess Bride, as long as you're only mostly dead and not all dead. Miracle Max can bring you back with a chocolate-covered miracle pill. Based on the size of it, at least it's not a suppository. Now, everyone say their favorite Princess Bride quotes. We'll wait. Matt, what's your favorite Princess Bride quote?
There's just too many. I think it's probably I'm also not left-handed. Yeah.
Man, I was watching a video on TikTok. I'm not proud of it, but apparently Mandy Patinkin is on TikTok for some reason, and someone asked a question, like this woman who was like a huge Princess Bride fan, like made a video asking a question on TikTok, and he responded to it, and it was this beautiful story about like how she her Princess Bride was her dad's favorite movie of all time, and he passed away recently, and he had heard that when Mandy Patinkin is saying the line, "I want my father back, you son of a bitch," to the six-fingered man, when he's saying, "I'll give you anything you want, anything," and he says, "I want my father back, you son of a bitch." Mandy Patinkin had lost his father not too long before the filming of that movie, and he was like channeling that when he gave that scene. So that like made that my favorite quote from Princess Bride, because of like it's like just freaking 2-minute TikTok video that just like made me weep, because it's just like well,
yeah, you can believe he's channeling it, because that's just a wonderful scene.
It's so good.
That's such an interesting movie, because it's like that's a very violent scene, really. And it's sort of a kid's movie, but sort of not a kid's movie, actually.
It's such a funny movie too, but that is like an emotionally powerful scene. I don't know.
I think I've commented to you before that it's funny to grown-ups, but it's not funny like a cartoon where it's just full of jokes for the kids that the kids will laugh at. Like when I was a kid, I didn't think it was funny at all. Now I love it though. It's an unusual movie. Shortstop 88 says, I feel like I'd be following the letter of the question if I said Aragorn or Gimli, but not the spirit, since both are over 70 years old during Lord of the Rings. I could go with Gandalf, since he satisfies that older position despite being thousands of years old. I think I'll choose instead, for an old character, Professor McGonagall, who in the books is between 55 and 62, based on external information, or if in her appearance in Crimes of Grindelgarbage is to be counted as canon, she's at least 84 to 90. Huh. I would think that she's sufficiently old to count even in the former, so I'll keep her. I always liked Minerva, and it was a shame she didn't get as much page time in the books. So I'm not using McGonagall from the original series. I'm I'm referring to McGonagall in the fan-written work, Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, which I've been reading over the last couple months. In this story, she and Harry have a much closer relationship, and it's such a lovely student-teacher connection that I love every scene they're in together. Although this did seem to remove Hagrid from the story entirely. There are a few changes that I don't care for in HPMOR, but the increase of time with Minerva was something I'm glad to have found. Yes, Minerva McGonagall in Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality is a great character, actually. I think she's one of the best characters in the story, and she has a great arc. It's a great story. It's great. It's better than Harry Potter. Anyway.
Next, we have Jennifer D, who says, I have forever had an innate love of older people. I've spent my career as a medical administrator focusing on facilities where I can interact with the elderly on a deeply personal level. They are one of the most underrepresented groups in American society, even as their numbers grow. If you take the time to listen, they have so much to offer, but unfortunately are too often ignored. My most impactful memory is during an activity session in a dementia unit. I asked the question, where were you on D-Day when you heard the news of Normandy invasion? I got many answers about school, work, cooking in the kitchen, and then a whisper from the back, I was in the water. I still get chills. We have living history all around us and so often forget to take advantage of it. On a lighter note, my favorite fictional old person is easily Dorothy Zborback from Golden Girls. She's one savage ass bitch.
That was heavy.
I agree with this though. I think, society, I think it's just because we don't, especially in our modern society, we just don't handle death well. And so like old people scare us broadly because they remind us of our mortality. And so we just like to kind of push them off and to the side and not think about it very much.
Yeah. I mean, I just never, I didn't, it's not that we never visited our grandparents, but it felt like few and far between enough that I didn't really know them that well. Mm-hmm. And those are like the only old people that I really interacted with ever. So I somehow like never learned how to interact with older people. I mean, which is stupid because it's like, I mean, I know how to interact with older people. It's just like when I was a kid, I didn't get in the habit of it. Sure. And that seems like a loss.
I think like we saw my grandparents fairly regularly. Like when I was a kid living in New Jersey, my grandparents lived in upstate New York, and like my mom would drive us all up there for we just stayed there for almost a whole month every summer. And so I interacted with my grandparents, at least on my mom's side, a lot. But I do remember like I had a great aunt that lived up there that like once a year when we were up there visiting for the summer, we'd have to go to her nursing home to visit her. And I didn't know who she was. And it was not an enjoyable experience for a young kid to just like seeing this extremely old woman that I had no understanding of who was. And I think that's a lot of people's experience with some old people is this like, it's a very awkward kind of forced, this is your family. Don't you like your family? And as a kid, you're like, I don't know who you are.
Right.
And I think that colors a lot of how we interact with older people.
Yeah. I mean, then I had later experience when I was in high school and I volunteered at a nursing home, and it was like, that was just like overwhelming and sad because it's not like, oh, it's because you're around old people. No, it's because you're around people who are isolated and lonely and miserable. And like, it's kind of like the worst part of their life that you're meeting them at. And it just gives you this terrible, like, oh, I want nothing to do with this feeling, which is, not fair to old people as a group.
I don't want to live in a nursing home. Oh gosh, I don't want to. I don't want to do that.
Don't worry, Scott. We'll have the pills.
Okay, good. I never have to get old because of the pills.
Yep. All right. Megan R says, my favorite old character in fiction is Christian Avasarala from the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. The Expanse is set in the near future. Humans have colonized the moon, Mars, and sections of the asteroid belt and the moons of the other planets. Humanity is divided into 3 camps, politely called Earthers, Martians, and Belters. The Earth and Mars have a uneasy working alliance, and the Belt are the rowdy outsiders that are exploited and dependent on both of them, and they're also full of rebels. We've got spaceships that can move pretty fast, but communications are still bound by the speed of light. Best analogy for tech level in this movie is Alien. And this character is a woman in her 70s of Indian descent. She's ascended to the role of United Nations Deputy Undersecretary of Executive Administration. So basically, she's like third in charge of Earth, of the UN of Earth, which is, the executive. She's the daughter of a well-known diplomatic father, a wife and mother and grandmother. At the start of this series, she's content with her place in the shadows. People don't really know who she is outside of diplomatic circles. She wants to do everything she can to make sure Earth is protected from all threats. She just doesn't want anyone seeing her do it. Her father was killed by Martian separatists, and her son was a Marine and killed by Belter revolutionaries in the line of duty. She's ruthless in her dealings with these groups because of this. I love this character. We read the first Expanse novel, and we watched the first episode of The Expanse for a Diffcast and a book club. And I've enjoyed The Expanse. I think I do want to continue reading the series. It was just one of those got too much shit to read situations. Yeah,
I'm definitely gonna finish reading the series and watch the TV show. I think really the only reason why I haven't tried is because I think Elliot and Ruben were trying to decide if they were going to do a podcast on it. That's some of our co-podcasters on the Doof Network that do some other shows. We're trying to decide if they want to do a show on those books, and I don't think they're going to. So I feel like I am free to to go ahead and just read them on my own now. I really enjoyed that world a lot. So and that character, I think she's great.
Yeah.
I didn't realize she was that old in the show. Is she depicted by someone younger? I feel like she is.
I feel like she's depicted by someone who you could pass as a grandmother.
Could pass as okay. Yeah, but grandmother is that's a.
I would have pegged her at more like 60, at 55, 60, but you know.
But that's like a TV 60 is like a real person 70.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, next we have Christopher L., who says, this one is easy. Herschel Green from The Walking Dead, a veterinarian who uses his knowledge to help people, a family man, most importantly, a pragmatic badass who is loved by all. Not going to spoil much if you've lived under a rock and not seen this show. I've watched the seasons of Walking Dead that Herschel Green is in it. I won't spoil it either, except to say that the actor who plays him is not alive anymore. So not saying what happens to the character, but the actor who played him was a man named Scott Wilson, who passed away, a few years ago now. Yeah, 2018.
Yeah, I just Googled him. I recognize him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's was in a ton of stuff. God, The Walking Dead is a show that I have such complex feelings about because I really enjoyed a lot of seasons, and then the show frustrated me so much to the point where I just fucking bounced and haven't looked back.
Yeah, I never watched it. I had people telling me I should watch it for years, and then all those same people at the same time went, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I watched the first season and enjoyed it, and some of the second season, and the show kind of stalled out in the second and some of the third season. They got a new showrunner who came in and breathed life into it, and I had already quit at that point, but my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was watching it, and so she got me back into it, and I think we watched it till season 7. And then we were just like, no, this is bad. And we bounced.
All right. Next, we have from Aaron D. This question makes me realize that most of my favorite characters in most of my favorite books and films /shows are usually elder. Whether it's Gandalf the White, Roland of Gilead, Grandmaster Yoda or Obi-Wan in the original trilogy, I appreciate the depth and wisdom that these characters offer. They seem to serve as the link to the past, which fills in the backstory when needed for the newer characters. That being said, my favorite fictional geezer would be Frank Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Danny DeVito does such an amazing job at portraying this character who possesses a heart of gold and a soul full of debauchery. It doesn't matter if he's eating cat food and huffing glue with his roommate Charlie, crying out in sadness for his lost friend Rumham, Matt. Okay. Or portraying a toll-taking, musically inclined troll. Frank Reynolds / Danny D is a true gem. He's like an R-rated Grandpa Simpson with money. Who tops that?
Oh my gosh, what an answer. I totally agree. I love Danny DeVito and his character. Like, the fact that Danny DeVito has spent the last 15 years playing the character of Frank Reynolds is amazing to me. It's just like he's just loving it. He's just loving his life. It's so great.
Yeah, he does seem to be having a lot of fun with it. It is really funny because it seems like we knew a whole different Danny DeVito before that show, right? Mm-hmm. It's like his second win to his career.
Yeah. Did you know in Batman Returns when he's eating that fish that Shrek gives him to lure him down to the mayoral meeting, it's real raw fish? Did you know that?
No, I didn't, but I can believe it. He was all in that performance.
Yeah, he ate real raw fish because he wanted it to be believable.
He's disturbingly all in on that performance.
Yes, sure. Yes. Steve L. says the guy from the movie Up was a great character, crotchety and lonely, but in the end does the right thing. Father Paul Dore in the Hyperion series is a great soul who takes on an enormous burden, consistently does the right thing, and is stronger than the circumstances and people which tried to bring him down.
Oh, God.
Am I remembering? Which one is...
I don't want to spoil it, but...
I know who...
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I remember who it is.
Okay.
Man, we need to finish that series
yeah, we do.
sometime. But my favorite has to be Moses Carver. At 100, when Roland finally goes to the Tet Corporation headquarters, he is still ornery, stubborn, and has a heart full of gold. Many of us constant readers would love to get a new book featuring his story between roles in the series. Yes, me too. Me too, Steve.
Yeah, let's write.
Loved Moses.
Let's write him. Let's write Steven.
Yeah, he'll definitely respond to us.
All right, Shenanigoats says, it's got to be Lady Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones / Song of Ice and Fire. You know she's got smarts and tenacity because she stayed alive for so long in Westeros. If she's in the scene, you know it's going to be a good one. Her witty remarks, dripping in sarcasm, are some of my favorite moments from the show, and I love that she got a great final scene. Yes, she's a great character. She's, obviously even better on the page, but of course, she gets one of the best performances in the whole show. So,
gosh, she's real good. She's
can't
real
really
good.
complain. It's pretty good.
There's a lot to complain about in Game of Thrones, but she is not one of those things for sure.
She is not. They knew what they had with that character, and they executed it perfectly.
Uh-huh. Last but not least, we have Spinagon, who says, my favorite elderly character is, of course, Kohen the Barbarian from the Discworld series. He's the send-up of a classic warrior action hero. He has conquered at least one country, has dozens of children, diamond dentures made from troll teeth, and tried to blow up a local equivalent of Olympus with all the gods on it. He has been everywhere and done everything, sometimes twice. Now he's somewhere between 90 and 95, and the heroic age is over. Trolls don't want to maintain bridges and live in cities instead, or run lumber mills. There's a tragic shortage of evil priests in the dark cults and fair maidens awaiting rescue, but Kohen is too set in his ways to change, and this creates problems for people who have to interact with him because he still behaves like an action hero, and he's very good at it, given that he managed to survive this long. I've only read one book in the Discworld series, and that's the one we read for book club a few months ago, Reaper Man. And I really liked it. And I want to read. Every time I read Pratchett, I end up really enjoying him. And I just haven't read that much yet.
Yeah, this one sounds fun, though. This sounds like a fun satire of this archetype.
Yeah, I'm into it for sure. All right. That is it for last week's question. Thank you to everyone who spent the time to submit those. Those were a lot of fun. I think you're going to have some fun with this week's question as well. Matt, why don't you read what we're asking folks this week?
This week, what is your favorite creepy nursery rhyme?
Yeah, in honor of that creepy rhyme that Doctor Number 3 gave at the end of this week's episode, what is your favorite nursery rhyme or song that either is on its own creepy or is made creepy by some movie or novel?
Yeah. The second part is important because anything can be creepy if it's in the right context.
That is true. That is true. Did you mean to say that kind of creepily?
Yeah.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us here on Kingslingers. As we said, next week we begin part 2 of Insomnia. We'll be reading and discussing chapters 11 through 13. So get those chapters read and then meet us here same time next week.
That's right. And remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And the subreddit at r/doofmedia is a great place to answer the questions and hang out with people as well.
Yes, and make sure you are subscribed to Kingslingers. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
That's right. And if you like the Kingslingers and any of our other shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Jake B and Adam K. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff that we have. For example, other levels of the tower, where we talk about Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah, we'll have a new episode of that next week, I believe, right?
That's the plan.
Yes, next week we'll have a new episode of Other Levels of the Tower. Also, Jake and Adam, I'm singling you two out specifically here. Have you read your stories and voted in the Do the King Thing contest yet? Have you done it? Have you done it?
Yeah, you get rewards, but you also have obligations.
Yeah, you have a job now. Read stories.
Yeah.
And of course, those of you who don't want a job and cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing the podcast on social media and all other places. And you can always help us out by leaving us those extremely important ratings and reviews. This week's Spotlight review comes from McNabb, who gives us 5 stars and says, "One of the best Stephen King podcasts out there. I joined for my 3rd trip to the tower and was delighted not only by the thought-provoking discussion, but also the insights that pointed out things I had missed along the way last times around. I thought I was going to be really sad when it was over until it was revealed that there would be a season 2. Yay! Which is now underway and making me look forward to Thursday mornings all over again. Well done, fellas." Well, thank you, McNabb. That's very nice.
Yeah, we're happy that we could continue to play.
Yeah, I'm having such a good time, man. I don't know about you, but this is great. It's a highlight of my week as well. So.
I mean, my only regret is that I can't just keep reading. I have to stop every week, which, all things considered, is worth it.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
All right, we're done. We'll see you folks right back here next week as we continue to make our way through Stephen King's Insomnia. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.